Welcome to the High Performance Hockey Podcast. Today we're joined by Brett Bartholomew. Brett is a performance coach, author, keynote speaker, and founder of Art of Coaching. Art of Coaching consults with corporations in the financial and tech sector, medical professionals, military, as well as professional sporting organizations to enhance their ability to lead more effectively through a better understanding of human behavior, persuasion, and power dynamics. His book, Conscious Coaching, The Art and Science of Building Buy-In, was named the #1 bestseller in sports coaching on Amazon, the #8 bestseller in business and leadership on Amazon, a top 100 bestseller on Amazon. Conscious Coaching is currently used by several universities to help guide future coaches and professionals alike. Prior to his work in the leadership space, Brett served as a performance coach for a diverse range of athletes across 23 sports worldwide, including those who compete in the NFL, NBA, MLB, UFC, MLS, NHL, and NCAA, Olympics, as well as members of the U.S. Special Forces and Fortune 500 companies. It's an absolutely outstanding podcast that we have today, sharing almost 90 minutes with Brett. We talk about communication. We talk about the use of role play. We talk about some of the courses that Brett's offered to sharpen the saw in terms and measures of power dynamics and what I call a heat meter, being a better communicator. It's an absolutely awesome episode. Welcome to the podcast. Brett, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Anthony, a.k.a. Dr. Konskov. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I need to give you a lot of compliments. You know what? We've met a while back at a Mike Robertson seminar, and during that time, the past several years, probably 6-7 years, we've communicated via text, via phone. You've done so many things for the strength and conditioning business, not just coaching, emotional intelligence, communication. I think one of the things that I respect about you most, Brett, is you're a very candid person. And there's times where when you and I speak, there's things that I'm like, wow, I'm so happy that I heard that from somebody. It was refreshing that how candid you are, but you have a beautiful way with words. So I want to thank you for our friendship. I want to thank you for what you've done for our profession. It's a pleasure for me to be able to chat with you today. So thanks, buddy.
Yeah, likewise. Although being candid, I don't know if it has done me any good. You still haven't gotten to any of our workshops, but I think as a matter of fact, it's made you avoid me more.
First jab has been thrown, folks.
Yeah. No, respect's mutual. You know, you're somebody that has always been. There's certain people that muddy the waters and make them seem deep. They like to play the analytical coach. They like to do these things. And really, they have no semblance of how to match the practical, the science-based stuff, all these pieces. And you do that wonderfully, man. And that's a real coach. So I appreciate you and everything that you do from the strategy side of things, sport performance side of things, and just being a human being, because I think that's the critical nature that doesn't get talked about enough.
Appreciate that. Most every one of our listeners know who you are. Certainly our podcast is more geared towards hockey, but there's a large breadth and depth of listeners in multiple sports as well. So, your background, right now you're a father, you're a business owner, you're a speaker, you're a student, you host a podcast. Right now, what does a day look like for you? And could you expand a little bit right now in terms and measures of your PhD journey? What are you studying? What are you trying to answer?
Yeah, well, I mean, for the hockey folks, by the way, I've worked with hockey as well. Anybody watching can see the Nate Thompson jersey behind me. I had me and Zach Cassian have had a lot of fun. Zach Cassian, if anybody, oh Lord, what a beaut. And then when I was in Phoenix, right, a good friend of mine, JP Major, worked with Coyotes for a while, and they would always come out to API. And so strong affinity for hockey. Just kind of love training with them. They'll do anything. They'll go through walls. Not a lot of prima donnas. You can get that with NFL. A lot of my background was NFL, Major League Baseball, a lot of military, and of course youth and all that as well. But you always had to love that. I mean, it was so weird the first time I worked with any hockey players. I'm like, oh, it's just that easy? You're going to run through a wall? Cool, man. That's great. And at first they'd take out their teeth before they go do it. So day in the life now, right? So very different in terms of I'm in a season of life where with Art of Coaching, we try to do a lot of different things. It's a leadership development company, very much based on a couple different premises. One, we want to change the way the world interacts when it matters most. And so a lot of our clients now are, yes, sports performance. A lot of people in the part of their career where they know the cents and reps. They know the X's and O's. They do that. Now they're dealing with higher order people-based issues, right? Power dynamics, agendas, organizational performance. How do I become a better leader? How do I deal with the messy realities of leadership? Now, coaching, if anybody familiar with the term, is not something that is just sports performance. Coaching originated in the 1500s. The term, it was really about mentoring, education. Well, stagecoach, obviously, people from here to there. It was always used in an education and mentoring sense, but it's very odd. There are some people that think art of coaching means we only serve strength coaches. No, not at all. That term, strength coaches do not have a monopoly on the term coaching. There are real estate coaches, there are coaches in all avenues of life. So, a big part of it, because our company is not exclusively for sports performance, we work with a lot of people in tech, finance, with counselors. If you go to any one of our workshops, it is not uncommon to have sports performance professionals sitting next to members of highway patrol, which happened in our last workshop, sitting next to people in real estate. We've had a lot of firefighters. So people that deal with people, that's the big piece. So helping people with the messy realities of leadership is one piece. Another arm of our business is helping other coaches and leaders, and I'm going to use the term synonymously from here on out, create platforms for themselves. And I looked in the music industry, and you saw people that were musicians, and then they started owning record labels, and then they helped other musicians get signed. They helped other musicians build a business. I see the same thing in other industries. Where in strength and conditioning, where you and I came up, that was not that. It was very dog eat dog comedy in the 70s. You winning meant I lose, and you could only do this. You could only be in the trenches your entire life. And it was very odd because a field that's obsessed with adaptation was not very good at adapting or evolving itself. A field that was good at periodizing programs for their athletes was not good at periodizing their careers. So we wanted to do that. We wanted to say, hey, if you're uncomfortable with self-promotion, you're uncomfortable with putting your ideas out there, or you want to evolve in your field, I get that that's a sticky wicket. It's something I've done myself. Let us help you. There is an ethical way to do these things. So really balancing the messy realities of leadership is something that is the intersection point of both of those things. How do I evolve in my career? And how do I handle these things that are difficult in my career right now that are in the gray area? So I'll stop right there and hit that question and then go further into anything else you want to cover.
No, that's outstanding. Answered it in great depth. I thought it was interesting. You and I were speaking off air a bit about PhDs. I shared with you very briefly a little bit of my journey. I decided to go get a PhD at age 40, 15 years away from academia. And I can tell you, for me, from my experience, it was a lesson really in resiliency as opposed to, certainly I learned a ton, critical thinking, et cetera. With you and all of these, all the juggling that you're doing with business, podcasts, et cetera. Number one, what are you researching right now? And number two, how could that parlay? I know you're talking about future projects and another book coming out. Could you explain a little bit more on those?
Yeah, the PhD, what I'm researching now and the totality of our business is multivariate. The PhD specifically is because we want to make that specific. Believe it or not, to date, there is nothing singularly focused on looking at the feasibility and effectiveness of communication training in strength and conditioning, right? So, and when I say communication training, I'm not talking about making people more fluent communicators. How do they take out ums and uhs and stutters and stammers? We're talking about how do people really refine the way they build buy-in, they connect with others, they interact in chaotic moments, navigating power dynamics, improvise. How do I improvise? Right now, you and I are improvising. You sent me some questions, but we're not being asked these in a scripted format. We don't know where the conversation is going to go. I don't know how you're going to respond. Every day is improvising. Somebody's listening to this while driving. They may be in traffic now. They don't know what's happening 10 miles up the road. So we want to look at how do coaches improvise in these constraint-based interactions that they have daily. And so there's three main outputs that we're looking at within the doctorate: semi-structured interviews to look and assess and get data off of coaches' current perceptions of communication, what they believe communication is, how important it is in their daily lives, how they would evaluate themselves. Do I look at, it was funny, we had a performance director say, well, I'd evaluate myself, I'd give myself a 10. I think I'm a pretty strong communicator. My next question then was, what formal tool have you used to come up with that number? How did you come up with that? And then he laughed and he goes, my God, nothing. Yeah, I guess I just go off of, do people do what I ask them to do? And then he laughed at how awful that sounded, because we know there's a difference between compliance and commitment. Just because people do what you ask them to do does not mean you are an effective communicator. So we looked at semi-structured interviews to get an idea of current perceptions and all those pieces. Then I had created an online course, which was a sequel to my book, Conscious Coaching. This online course is called Bought In. There were a lot of things I couldn't put in the book. Books have to be a certain length. Obviously, you don't want to get too into the weeds. You need them to be digestible. Conscious Coaching was released 5 years ago. Subtle plug, available on Amazon worldwide if anybody's interested. But that was just the beginning of the conversation. So with that online course, we wanted to assess the feasibility and effectiveness. Would coaches be interested in a course that taught them about human nature, a little bit of social science, human interaction? So we assessed that. How many people signed up for it? What was their feedback? How did they feel about instructional design? How did they do on the final exam, etc.? The final output for my doctorate is then looking at the feasibility and effectiveness of an in-person facilitated workshop, one that is very much centered upon role-playing, the use of improvised strategies, film review, formal evaluation, peer feedback, self-evaluation, and group feedback. Things that collectively assess where might I be the problem. A lot of these coaches and leaders, because again, synonymous, right? They think, oh, I have this issue with a colleague at work, or hey, I'm having an issue with this conflict of negotiation, or I don't know how to negotiate, or I don't know how to do this. And then they do it, and then they're able to see themselves on camera. To date, it is the only facilitated output that uses video feedback, a formal evaluation, all backed by science to give people real-time feedback. Now, a mix of objective and subjective. Guess what? Everything in life is subjective. You could take 10 lie detector tests, have all the objective data in the world that says you didn't kill somebody. If a jury of your peers considers you subjectively to be guilty, guess what? All your objective data doesn't mean a lick. Life is subjective. So we're able to evaluate within constraints and give hey, here, I saw you as a 3 here. I saw you as a 1 here. Here's what I would have done. And just like if you're teaching me how to perform a hang clean and you're like, hey, Brett, try this. Great. Thanks, Anthony. Give me that tip. If you do something in your communication that I'm like, hey, Ann, it was great how you did this from an assertiveness standpoint. Can I give you something that I would do from a question standpoint and kind of a motivational? Yeah, Brett, show me how you'd handle it. Cool. Now I can go there and we can glean information off one another just based on approaches. So yeah, collectively looking at those outputs within the realm of communication and really the medical world is leading the way here because there's so many lawsuits because of patient-practitioner interactions that they're just not good. A doctor can improve somebody's, pain from a certain thing, but if they lack bedside manner, that's a $15 million lawsuit. So medical practitioners are utilizing role-playing and evaluations and all these things. Strength and conditioning, in the meantime, nothing. Training certifications abound. Oh, are you a kettlebell guy? You got your FMS, your FRC. Oh, does anybody actually study how to coach? No? Oh, okay, cool. Talk to me later. It's concerning.
That is a fantastic answer. Dotting I's, crossing T's. Fantastic. One thing that stood out at me, you talked about this idea of no matter how objective we are subjective. I don't care. To me, my opinion right now in strength and conditioning is the pendulum swinging. We're talking about numbers, technology. I don't know if it's at the expense of first principles. I don't know if it's at the expense of communication. But one thing I always try to tell coaches, get the number. But here's the subjective part between the numbers. There's an assumption. So why are you tracking that number? And then there's an analyzation. Well, how are you analyzing that number? In communication, my question to you is, do you feel that because there's no objective way people want to stray away from it? It's not important. From your experience?
I do need to be clear. There is objective ways to measure the effectiveness of communication in context. Marketing research does this, they've done this for over a century. When they put out messages on commercials, they know how message tailoring and message targeting, did this ad hit? Yep. All right. Communication is not just words. It is symbolism. It is the visuals and all those things. So it's funny to me that people think marketing companies or like organizations like Coca-Cola or whatever would throw hundreds of millions of dollars just into the air on a Super Bowl ad. These people, the words they use, the color of their product, the visuals, the symbolism, the graphics, the logos, they know exactly what they're doing. There is tremendous objective research in those things. Within the medical community, they're objectively coding different aspects of communication. They're saying, hey, let's say they code for objective use and value for forms of inquiry, right? Okay. Like what types of questions are you using? Are they leading questions? Are they disclosure-based questions? Are they for objectivity to be a thing, you just have to code it correctly and have a determined goal output. It needs to be within constraints in these pieces. Now, how people value that, right? My neighbor and how he's impacted by a marketing message is going to be subjective versus how I'm impacted by it. But when we look at objectivity, that absolutely can be done. I mean, lawyers have to be very objective in the way that they communicate, in the way that they tailor their communication and all these things. So, when we look at objectivity, like if somebody wants universal objectivity regardless of context, that is a myth. Yeah. That is absolutely a myth. And objectivity, there's an article as such on the National Library of Medicine. The title is Objectivity is a Myth That Harms the Practice and Diversity of Forensic Science. You have to look at, if you look at human beings, we are very complex. We're very complex, interdependent. Now, you could even look at every psychology study in the world that observed humans, and you could almost throw that data out because of the Hawthorne effect. No matter what you're studying with human beings, just by them knowing they're being observed, they're going to change their behavior, which hurts universal objectivity. But the data, as long as it's very specific and measurable and consistent and you have to look at that. So there's subjectivity in everything. I mean, there's people that believe, despite the objective research, that the world is round. There are people that believe it is flat. There are people that objectively, you could tell me that this tastes better than that. Subjectively, I may not believe you. There are people that have murdered people. The evidence is clear. Subjectively, they have gotten off. And so it just doesn't, I don't know who this crowd is that thinks we live in a world where anything is purely objective. Oh, yes, I do. There are people that crave control and a security blanket because they don't like messing in the gray area. You shouldn't be a coach.
Love this. I want to pivot slightly. I want to tie in the communication piece to strength and conditioning specifically. I think for me, I look back at it now, coaching for close to 20 years. I look back at many of the mistakes that I've made as a coach. I continue to make mistakes. Obviously, that's how we learn. This fertilizer effect. But I can tell you now that far more of my mistakes from a standpoint as an early practitioner were communication based. They weren't periodization. They weren't sets and reps. I'm fond of saying to our young interns, a program is only as good as the perception of the program, right? A perception. This is a quote. This is from your site on Bought In. It took me 6 years of my career to understand that any training program I created was only as good as my athletes' willingness to buy into it. Communication is a skill, one that is necessary for learning and leadership to take place in any capacity. Yet the vast majority of us receive little to no formal training on it whatsoever. This omission leads to the development of significant blind spots in our personal and professional development. We struggle to relate to others, resolve conflicts, and adapt to chaotic circumstances. Now, I wish I thought that way when I was a young coach. I'd like you to expand on that quote, if you would.
Yeah, the bottom line is no matter how good your idea, your invention, your initiative is, if it doesn't resonate with people, they're not going to do it. Everybody lauds Apple as this tremendously innovative company, the iPad, the iPod, the iPhone. People forget about the Newton. The Newton was invented way before any of those, and it failed miserably. People forget about the Microsoft Zune. The Microsoft Zune was it felt like that hardware was amazing, but it didn't tie into iTunes, so it wasn't easy for people to get great media files. They had to go to BearShare and LimeWire, and they didn't know if the files were corrupt. So Apple ended up winning because they said, hey, we think that people would rather pay for like true quality audio files than, roll the dice. So the iPod won because of that. They made it convenient. They made it easy. Now, think about all the things that we do daily that make sense on the surface, but people don't adopt it. Jesus, we live in a world where people don't brush their teeth, exercise, and eat right. You know what I mean? So there's objectivity at work for you. Brushing your teeth can decrease the risk of cavities and this and that. Does that change people's behavior? Does that, hey, be hydrated? Are there plenty of people that hydrate? Get more sleep. There's objective research behind that. Do people get enough sleep? So this is, again, where I laugh at this. And so at the end of the day, yes, you can write the best program. Let's say we have objective data that says, let's say we have a case study. All right, let's look at a case study where somebody needs to increase their lower body strength. Their power output is poor. Just their whole strength power profile is not good. Well, we have objective research in strength and conditioning that shows exercises like squats, cleans, depth jumps, deadlifts, all these things. Do you agree? As well as their unilateral counterparts can increase strength or power output relative to context. Yep.
Absolutely.
Well, no matter that objective data, no matter how well written that program is, what if we have an athlete that has a wide variety of maladies where some of those exercises exacerbate those symptoms? Or, like I had athletes that in the past had been hurt by some of those exercises because they had shitty coaches and then they don't want to do it. So no matter what, if I have that in my program, then they're going to show reticence to it. They're maybe not going to apply it all. I remember one time I was training a 3-time Pro Bowler and we were doing, can I talk training nerd stuff here?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay. So I remember we were doing an auto-regulatory based program and I had about 9 weeks of data on him. We had utilized this for very consistent. Of course, there's ebbs and flows. There's good days, bad days, all those things. Well, there was one day where he should have been within a 5 to 7 rep range of the auto-regulatory protocol. And let's say that even if he feels great that day, if that's spot on, he should maybe get 10. He should maybe get 10. Then you're like, shit, I got to increase the numbers, which of course we did over 9 weeks. The dude knocks out 25. Huh. I look at him and I go, what the F was that? I go, look at your numbers. And I pull up 9 weeks worth of data, all this. We had changed the numbers over time. Everybody knows, anybody listening, auto-regulatory works. He looks at me and you know what his response was? I gave a F today. And I go, what do you mean you didn't give an F? He goes, he basically talks about how he broke up with somebody that pissed him off. He had a bunch of, and he's just like, that day he just decided that that's what he was going to do. Now that wasn't a coaching tactic of mine. That was just life being life. But all of a sudden that dude had more engagement. And because he had more engagement, he applied more effort. Because he had more effort, he had a different outcome and whatever. And then all that data was prior to that was worthless. And so your job as a coach is to write a program, yes, and an ethical program at that. But at the end of the day, you should measure and say, hey, if I had 3 exercises here, and they're the most basic, banal exercises I got, and maybe you only have 2 tools. Let's say it's a dumbbell and a barbell with some plates. I'll consolidate that as one tool. If you can't coach the hell out of that so well that at best, somebody that has every piece of equipment in the world, all these other things, then you're not doing your job. Your job is to get people engaged and to care, because training itself is nothing more than a tool to teach people what they're capable of. The sets and reps and the exercises don't do the work for you. And this is evident to anybody that's ever coached. Because when I was in the collegiate side, I was in charge in totality of about 8 teams and an assistant for 2 of those. And, you would look at your programs, they're all different variations of the same thing. Cheer and dance, they may do this, football does that, whatever. And there's different things of what are you going to do in the frontal plane? How much rotary work are you going to do? All those pieces. But it wasn't, other than genetics and access, they all had access to the same food. They had all this, other than genetics, you had to just be like, what shows whether people give a shit or not? Oh, their ability to actually get under the bar, their training age, and their ability to engage. I mean, come train in the garage gym, right? Let's say it's you and me, and we have 3 exercises. Don't you think we can get more out of those 3 exercises than the average person at Gold's Gym doing 12?
100%.
Right. Yeah. So this just goes into motivation, trans-theoretical models, what people are driven by. And the concept is very simple. If I'm more bought in, like I said, I give more engagement. If I'm more engaged, I give more effort. If I give more effort, I have better outcomes because they're applying more strain and tenacity. It's how learning happens. It's basic learning.
Another thing that I think is interesting as I've aged as a coach, I'd be curious as to get your opinion on this. With our advanced level hockey players that come in, they come in from a grueling off season. The first question I ask them is, obviously how you feel, but hey, what worked for you in the past? What did you like this past summer? What do you want to, what are some exercises that you want to stick with? If it's a new person, how do you want to be coached? I guess the best way I can explain this is I think it's a cooperative effort. Obviously, if there's something philosophically completely on its head, I'm going to try to educate the end user and say, hey, we got to stay away from this. But I want them to believe in that program without compromising philosophy. I want them, it's not so much an instructor, it's a consultant-based approach with the elite. I might take a different stance with the young athlete. It might be more directive in my approach, right? I'm still going to talk with them that way. Do you see that too as you've worked with both populations of young and older in terms of this cooperative versus directive approach, or do you not see that? Is it less of a binary type, either or?
All right, just so I understand the question, are you saying, do we need to change our coaching styles dependent on the audience, essentially?
Yeah, I would say more like the training age, someone that's older, playing professional sports, they've had a higher training age where little Tommy who looks like a wilted, candle when he squats, it's going to be much more directive in nature, cooperative versus directive.
Yeah, no question. I mean, there's an equifinality to all this, right? And that just means that, I mean, anybody that's done this long enough knows that just about anything you do to a degree is going to work. So let's quit acting like we're God, and if you've experimented with a lot of these things, if you've done traditional linear, daily undulating, weekly undulating, autoregulatory, it's all the same thing. We're really just modulating stress, right? And we're maneuvering these things around. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be different levels of athlete autonomy as the training age increases. These people know their body. I don't really care to die on the sword with somebody that's got, 10 years of really true qualified training age of whether they want a belt squat, back squat, front squat. You can get all the research in the world about how back squat's better than all this. And well, coach, front squat targets the quads more and this does this and this and this. Well, guess what? That's why you have other exercises. Yeah. Even if I have somebody that can only front squat, it's more quad dominant. Well, then guess what? You include a little bit more glute ham. You do a little bit more single leg RDL. You do a little bit more volume on the posterior chain. Like this idea that like you got to have, and I lived and died by that at a point in time, and it didn't do my body any good. Yep. Like you just have to look at the person, and it doesn't take, and then we fall in love, and this has nothing to do with Kelly Starrett, very good friend to love. But even Kelly would tell you that like you can floss and mobilize and do this all to a point, but if you just look at general anatomy, pelvis, right, like femur, all this stuff, not everybody's going to move the same, nor should they. I'm at a point right now where my body's so beat to shit from things that I do. I still squat, but it's mainly front squat, belt squat. I'll belt squat with you. And guess what? I'm able to buttress anything that I'm not getting by not back squatting with other things, axial loading. What do you do? Well, I'll still catch cleans. I'll still do barbell loaded lunges. I'll still do barbell loaded step ups. Just this idea that, oh my God, if we just don't do this exercise and we don't do those guys that have been longer down the road, your job is to make sure they're sustainable in their performance. Sure. Congratulations, coach. You did all the exercises you should. That guy still can't play now because his knees hurt because you felt like you wanted to do the latest research, even though that exacerbates his pain. Kids, they're a little bit more malleable, right? Yep. Like you have that idea. You have this piece of clay that you can work with. They still have motor skill erudition. They don't really know how to strain. If they say they can't do this, you don't know if they can't do it, or they're just not doing it correctly. You have to have a little bit more directive approach. They can't always have the autonomy. Now, you can give them autonomy within bounds. Let's say a kid's been through like 9 weeks of a youth development program, and you look at a movement pattern and it's an upper body push, right? And maybe he's shown competency in push-ups. He's shown some base competency in dumbbell bench press, whatever. Cool. Then you give him kind of a choice, but I don't know that that's really needed, especially if you're trying to systematize that. Just have that variety in there. Variety is okay, Did that answer your question?
Sure did. I want to pivot back to strength and conditioning. Actually, we're staying in it, but it's a broad-based question. Right now, the current landscape, what are we doing well? What are we doing poorly? And how can we improve our field? And this goes for everything: communication, promotion, self-promotion. What are we doing well? What are we not doing? What do we need to improve upon? And how can we improve it?
Yeah, I mean, I think what the field continues to do well but this is where virtue becomes vice. God knows it continues to look and research questions as to different loading strategies. And I think the other day I saw a research article on the effect of accentuated eccentric bench press. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. But I don't know about you. I have trained more than 500 professional athletes. Never once have I been like, you know what's missing in this guy's program? Accentuated eccentric bench press. Order the weight releasers. Let's go. 9 times out of 10, I still got to teach people how to clean. So I think what we do well is we also do poorly. Like we just continue to focus on these rabbit holes of, should we do this? Oh, Poliquin says the eccentric should be 4 seconds. So somebody else says 5 seconds. Or what about quasi-isometric and this? These things are important. Yes. But you have to know when you've kind of gone too deep. Most people forget to do eccentrics and any kind of isometric in their program. So let's not then start arguing, is it a 1 second difference here, a 1 second difference here? The problem is it does the strength and conditioning side well. It does the coaching and business side poorly. There's a great, and we talked about this at our apprenticeship workshop, great article by, and I'll probably mispronounce it, Lefevre and Evans and colleagues in 2016 that showed the state of coach development programs. And this was sport coaching as well. They examined 285 coach development programs, and 92% of those focused solely on the technical aspect. 6% focused on interpersonal, 2 intrapersonal. When we have people that can state their training philosophy more clearly and eloquently, then they can identify their coaching identity, you have done something wrong. When you have a field that has myriad training-based certifications, yet not one, the vast majority of them do not go to one, coaching and communication-oriented outputs, that is a problem because you are in the people business, not the workout or training business. All these it's about relationships, it's about connection. And then I go, oh yeah? What have you done lately to work on that? And you'd be surprised at the answers you get. One guy goes, well, I communicate every day. Why should I have to work on it? What? Well, I move every day. I guess we shouldn't teach movement. I wake up a husband every day. I guess I don't need to work on my marriage. Like, what are you saying? Communication can cost people their life if you do it wrong. Somebody takes the research in telehealth shows that during COVID, when they had to increase telehealth, more than 80% of patients on telehealth remembered the information from their provider incorrectly. You take medication the wrong way, you remember something wrong from a healthcare visit the wrong way. And people forget that meanings are not in words, they're in people. So you constantly have to refine what you say, how you say it.
Oh.
And we didn't want to just complain about it. That's why, we started the Art of Coaching apprenticeship and saying, we are going to create the first facilitated output to help people learn how to communicate more adaptively. And the term we use is social agility, right? We're not teaching you like bold BS here. This isn't a Tony Robbins thing. Like, this is how do you be socially agile in chaotic, conflict-ridden moments in your life. And then the final thing, and I'll be shorter with this, is people don't understand the business. They don't. They forget, a lot of people just get into this because they like working out, like being in a weight room. And that's fine. That was a part of why I did it too. But this is a business. You better learn that it's a business. And you better understand that it's okay to talk about money. I mean, we had to create a whole free resource on artofcoaching.com/finance. I think it's either that or artofcoaching.com/money. That because I looked around and I'm like, oh my God, there's nothing for strength coaches to learn about their finances, all this. So my dad was a broker for 40 years, financial advisor. We had him come on, do a whole thing about how to manage your finances. So a lot of what we're trying to do at Art of Coaching is plug these gaps. The world wasn't getting better by me just adding to the voices of squatting and agility. And I like talking about that stuff. That's fine. But now let's say, all right, how do you manage your finances? How do you manage interactions? How do you manage your career? How do you manage yourself? And we're going to do another workshop in 2023 about coaches and relationships. And if somebody's like, oh, I just asked them this, how many financially secure, healthy coaches do you know that have a great relationship and are not just grinding themselves to death? You know many of them?
I don't. And I might go on a limb too in the private sector and say how many of those same coaches can retire as a strength coach. That's tough.
And it's not saying there's none of them, right? Like you and I are both in relationships. I've been married 10 years. Who knows? Like I might, let's say 5 years from now, I'm divorced, heaven forbid. And somebody goes, oh, Mr. Communication guy couldn't hold together his relationship. Guys, this stuff happens to everybody. So I'm not casting stones and saying if you're one of those, I'm just saying when we have a field that like we're not taking care of each other. We're not taking care, and like the field is built. Here's another thing we do poorly, and then I'll get back to the positive. It's built on separation. Are you a Olympic guy or a West Side guy? Are you a private sector guy or a team setting guy? Are you a front squat guy or a back squat guy? Are you a this or are you a that? Figure it out. We're all coaches. I don't know that there's many of us that don't want to get people better, have a great career, make a difference in the lives of others, make some money, and have a great relationship and enjoy training. So why are we still combating and finding, why is there still a collegiate strength and conditioning conference and an NSCA con? Why? And so like we thought about that with Art of Coaching. We're like, if people feel like they can't wear our shirt, no matter what sector, situation, or whatever they're in, we did something wrong. Or it's probably just because they don't like me. But like we want Art of Coaching to be this umbrella that's like, yo, this signifies a company that is about helping coaches succeed. We don't want the zero-sum mentality people. Don't come here to argue and show that you're better and do this. Come here to further the culture, further the coaching community. Come here to grow together. Otherwise, just we got better things to do.
I know you and I have spoken off air before, and you've given me some great advice on this. This idea of the business aspect of coaching. I don't know where it came from. I still struggle with this. It's like, someone reaches out, they want your time. And it's like, the old adage, okay, well, you got to give back, or you got to versus, hey, how can we set up a situation where there's a possible consulting opportunity? And it's not about not wanting to give back. It's everybody's got a finite amount of time, and we have to be more business-like in our approach, yet for whatever reason, and I'm not speaking for the broad audience, this idea, well, then you're not giving back. Does that make sense in our field?
We have a podcast episode on this and
Yep.
Our coaching bike. It's called The Weaponization of Guilt. Here's the thing. I would love to go into a restaurant down the street and be like, can I have some free food? And when they go, no, sorry, I'd be like, oh, then you're not really in it for the right reasons. I'd love to go to my doctor and I'd be like, oh, I have to pay an outpay. I have to pay, a copay. Oh, I thought you were in this for the right reasons. You don't want to give back. You don't want to just help people. I'd love to go to the bank if my utilities get shut off and be like, hey, I can't pay my bills, but I'm in my field for the right reasons. What this is this shows just a lack of professionalism and a lack of just understanding of economics. Anybody that accuses somebody of not giving, like, hey, you need to pay for my time, look, what other field can you do that? Can you get legal advice and not pay beyond a first consultation? Can you get healthcare and not pay, depending where you're at in the world? The answer is yes. Can you go to restaurants and not pay? Can you take a trip and not, like, what I learned, and I used to fall for this for a while, and like they led that, is these are people that just really aren't serious about it. They don't respect you. They don't value you. And it's a really sick, manipulative, in a negative sense of the term, way of interacting. And all it shows to me is that they're not professional. I mean, dude, you're my friend. And if I needed advice from you or whatever, I would be happy to pay for your time. I would be happy. And the other thing that pisses me off is when we had somebody one time that was like, hey man, I'm in town, would love to have coffee, pick your brain, all these kinds of things. And I just remember at the time, like they wanted me to basically drive 45 minutes. Well, I'm writing a new book. I'm working on my doctorate. I have a business to run. My business is entirely self-funded. All these things. I'm coaching. I couldn't just take time, 45 minutes, and that had nothing to do with that person. I just couldn't do it that day, and that wasn't going to work. So I remember I said, I'm sorry, I can't make this work. I'm happy to jump on a FaceTime with you. Or I sent him a link to our mentoring, and he just went apoplectic. It was just like, oh, I can't believe you do this and that. You know what, man? The very next person I talked to was happy to pay for my time, was super respectful. We've had a 5-year relationship to this day. Wonderful human being. You're like, it's not your responsibility to help everybody, and I look at this now and I say, listen, I have a book online. I have so many free resources, so many. I have 220 some odd podcast episodes. I have YouTube videos that have answered everything of what advice do you have for new coaches? What certification should I get? What book should I read? I have more than 2,000 collective resources out there that have cost me over a decade of my time. Each online course bought in, valued, all that, $30,000 to create them. So if somebody says I can't afford it for $497 and you should give it for free, I just tell them, I'm sorry. That's like, no, that's not the So I just think that that's what I mean by the lack of professionalism in the field. And it's just based off of, again, people have made their passion their profession. So they think they're entitled to something. They're entitled. And so I don't think it's anybody's, you don't owe anybody anything except respect. And you are not entitled to anything. Here's a list of what the world owes you. And I'm holding up a blank piece of paper.
Looks like my hairline.
Right. But just the short of that is, where else could you just go in and demand free advice, free time in perpetuity? And I'm not saying nobody can I'm not saying never give anybody your time. That's not what I'm saying.
No.
And the combative people would say that, but I'm just saying that those people just signify that they are not, that is not professional. I don't even know how that's wired. That's not how the world works in any profession. I do remember one time there was somebody that was like, well, so-and-so at, this school give me their time for free. I'm like, oh, somebody else picked up the check for that, buddy. That person makes $500,000 a year and you went to them. Don't compare me to that person, because they also don't have all these free resources that you can do. So I just think people need to be professional. Even when I was broke, like making $10K a year, I remember reaching out to Dan John, offered to pay for his time. Set yourself apart, be a professional and invest. Otherwise, you're not going to use that information anyway. Most of these people that want shit for free, they just fall right into the execution gap. How well do you take care of anything that you have for free?
Yeah, great. Another thing I wanted to chat on, I know you're offering a new resource on this as well. I can, again, point the thumb as a coach. I don't think I do a great job of self-promotion. How do we better that? And what is I know that you've got a course coming up. Could you educate the end user, the listener, on what that may be and what you're going to speak about?
Yeah, I think, one thing, and this is just going into the definition, if everybody would just take a moment and type in definition, promotion, or promotion definition, the very first thing you're going to see in the Oxford Dictionary is an activity that supports or provides active encouragement for the furtherance of a cause, venture, or aim. Okay. So this idea that self-promotion is salesy, slimy, awful, is it really? Or does it depend on how we utilize it, right? Hammers have been used to build homes for the homeless. They've also been used as a murder weapon. So, to say that this term is inherently evil is absolutely silly. Should a musician who spent the last 5 years creating a music album not promote it? Should a restaurateur that has put their life savings into a restaurant not promote it? Should somebody that just made a movie not promote it? Where in your life, great work isn't just magically known about, right? It's known about because people share information. And I remember something I had heard of oh, well, what do you have to say that hasn't been said before? Okay, well, I've heard a love song. Should nobody else write any more love songs? I've seen an action movie. Okay, hey, Ann, you want to make an action movie? No, man, there's 4,200 of them. Don't. The Rock should never make another action movie. No more action movies. If you want to make a tequila, sorry, there's so many tequilas. No more tequilas. No more this. People forget that, and I fell into this too. It wasn't until one of my athletes goes, and this was 2012, 2011. Don't quote me on it. He goes, "You on Twitter?" I go, "Real coaches aren't on Twitter." He goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "I'm coaching." He goes, "Well, you educate interns all the time. You don't think anybody else wants to learn from you?" And I just repeated what my mentors told me. "Oh, I haven't said anything." And he's like, "Do you ever think that they care about your perspective and not everybody else's?" And he's like, "That's pretty hypocritical." And I thought about it, and it was true. Yep. And then I remember going to a coaching conference at the USA, it was the US Olympic Symposium, and the guy was talking about branding. And, the entire audience was like, "Oh, branding." And somebody came up to me and they were like, "Hey, we just think that takes away from the purity of the profession." I go, "All right, well, tell Nick Saban that when he does his Geico commercials. Tell Nick Saban that he's not a real football coach because he does Geico." And by the way, our athletes, I guess, should never go on and have sponsorships and brands, and, they shouldn't do anything like that. So here's the reality. Here's your soundbite. If everybody who wanted to share their work had a guarantee that it would help people save lives, be well received, they would all share it, right? People aren't really scared of promotion. They're scared of rejection. They're scared of rejection. They're scared of how they're going to be judged. They're scared of how it's going to be received. They'll quote Theodore Roosevelt's "Man in the Arena" all day in their weight room, but they won't want to share it because they're scared of rejection. But then what they do to bolster their ego is say, "Well, I'm in it for the right reasons." That's what's called an exemplification impression management tactic. It means you're trying to make yourself look better or save face by appealing to moral virtue, by saying, "I'm in it." No, you're not. You're scared that nobody's going to like what you have to say. Because if you had a guarantee that everybody was going to love what you had to say, they're going to be like, "That's brilliant. You saved my life. You've helped me. You've done this." Then you would share everything. And not only that, I'll go a step further. You have a responsibility if you have something that you think can help people. You have a literal moral, I'll flip it on you. You have a moral responsibility to share it, because the people that do not have morals, they don't have any problem sharing it. So don't sit here and complain about all the bullshit in the world, and then you sit there and go, "Oh, well, I'm in it for the right reasons." That's so egotistical, because what you're saying is 8 billion people in the world, 8 billion people. I guess they should just know about you through ESP. I guess that the vibrations of the universe should just tell somebody in Bangkok, "Holy shit, Anthony Donskov's the guy." Anthony Donskov's the guy. And so, if you don't share your value, tell your story, anything, somebody else is going to. And I promise they're not going to be as responsible, as delicate, as detailed, as nuanced as you're going to be. So yeah, we're doing a free workshop, because I struggled with it too, on how do you overcome that guilt? What are 5 tips for authentically and ethically doing that? what do you say? Because this is important when naysayers and friends, because people are scared of judgment and rejection. What do you say when naysayers and friends are like, oh, Mr. Big Time? I got that all the time. Oh, Mr. Big Time with your book. I'm like, really? Would you say that to me if I had a restaurant and I was just opening it, you big time me? And then it's like, it's your insecurity, dude. Don't make me feel bad because I put my life savings into my book and I'm sharing it. Piss off. You don't do that to Malcolm Gladwell. You don't do that to Ryan Holiday. You're not like, oh, Mr. Big Time. Like, and then how can you spot fakers and pretenders? What are strategies for growing that without relying on social media? You don't need to be a social media star. I hate social media. I share some of that because that's just part of the thing you have to do. But yeah, we're going to try to help coaches with that, but we can't help people that don't want to be honest with themselves. If somebody just wants to come and play gotcha, don't sign up. You can, for those that really want to grow, just go to artofcoaching.com/impact. We're going to be very straightforward and help you out.
It's interesting, little off the cuff comment. I had the opportunity to write a couple books myself, and I remember writing the first book, and I got a really nasty review, 1 star, and it was actually, I took it quite personally. I was like, wow, that's, and then I realized as I've gotten older and older, criticism is great. I actually thrive with critique. I don't know if I'd call it critique, but I like the right critique. Offer me a superior explanation. Offer me some ways to improve that, not either ad hominem, this is crap, the cover came ripped or whatever it may be. Give me some feedback. But I can tell you from the human part, I do remember reading that for the first time. I was like, wow, that one hit, that one hit.
Oh, dude, you're a better person than I am. I chased one person down that called me like a cult leader or this and that in an Amazon review. He left his name and I found out his contact information and chased him down. Like, it called him. And basically, because he said things like, my family should be embarrassed, all this. Wow. He ended up just saying that he wrote a book once. It failed. He got really tired of seeing my book everywhere. And it was more of a him issue, like after we're friends to this day. He just kind of admitted it was my own thing. I'm really sorry. Now, it took about a 45-minute conversation to get there. But that was like when that ended for me in terms of worrying about, I had people leave 1-star reviews because they said it didn't have enough pictures. Nowhere in the book does it say it's going to be a picture book. And again, we live in a world where people could see somebody walk on water and they'd be like, they can't swim. And so I think you just got to remember Miles Davis, people hate him. People can read the best authors of any time, whether it's Vonnegut, whether it's this and that. People can look at, you could go look at, let's see, real time. I'm going to Amazon right now. And I'm going to type in Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Okay?
One of my favorites, by the way.
Right. Man's Search for Meaning. Now, it's got 46,500 reviews. Now, if I go to the ratings, there are people that have given it 1 star. Here we go right now. A must read if you want to be bored. Don't get me wrong. The bigoted cruelty that humans face is unfortunate, but I found the message to be repetitively repetitive. A self-help book that repetitively says, help thyself repetitively, like so many other help books. 1-star review, printed wrong, because that's the author's fault. Great book with tiny font. Had to return it. This book will steal your bread. Oh, that reviewer's name was Anthony. Might be you.
Gee, Merry Christmas.
So people realize that this is par for the course. And then again, coaches listening, and I'm sorry for the frank language, and I'm sorry if it's, but quit with the bullshit. Your athletes, what if they were like, oh, the criticism and the boos, and then you'll stand in front of your weight room and be like, you use those boos, you use that conflict as fuel, rise up, be better. And then you're like, but I don't want to be judged in my work. And that's why I love being around coaches that are entrepreneurial, stuff like that now, because it's a different fraternity. And I'm not using that. That's equal sex. I know fraternity means guys, but I'm being inclusive here. I love meeting all kinds of coaches, but there's a different relationship with coaches like yourself that are entrepreneurial. You've eaten shit. And guess what? I have you. Some people love you. A lot of people love you. Some people hate you. Me too. Let's talk about it. But you know what? We will not go into the dirt without having put skin in the game. And that puts you in rare air. Because all the other people that talk about wanting to make a difference, you guys and audience listening, like, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just saying, quit undervaluing yourself. Quit undervaluing yourself. Nobody gets out of this game alive. Nobody gets out of it alive. Nobody gets out of it universally liked. If you did, that'd be super creepy. Your people will find you. It takes a long time. There's stages of this. Stage 1, okay, I want to put myself out there. Expect a lot of crickets. Don't take that as nobody likes it. It takes time to break through. You got to get through, right? It takes a lot of time to break through. Stage 2, okay, some people are hearing, we're getting some early adopters. This is cool. Stage 3, now you're getting some criticism as you really grow.
Yeah.
Can you get through that middle point of the movie where the villain's winning and whatever? Stage 4, you've calloused to that. Okay, now we got our audience, small but continuing to grow. And then you might see 2, 3, 10 years of just meh, meh, meh. And then if you have the ability, hockey stick. But most people just don't. Super compensation all day in training. We don't want to talk about it in business.
That's brilliant. I like this idea of callous. That's fantastic. I want to shift here, something you're very passionate about, and I want to talk about the courses where this is offered. We do our best in our small business to offer this. I personally think in our staff meetings, it is probably one of the most important things that we can do, which we've got away from since COVID, and I'll point the thumb at that. Situational awareness. Where does it fit in the communication toolbox? Why are we intimidated by it as coaches? And please talk too about the services and the courses where this takes place within your business.
Yeah. So, situational awareness comes from being in situations and dissecting them and having to interact with them. It's no different than, you find yourself like, how do we understand motor learning? My master's degree is in motor learning, right? Like, okay, we come up against constraints and we try to find a variety of ways to move around it, to navigate it. And then we create a movement plan. There's no such thing as optimal, but successful and what have you. The long and short of it is what we utilize is role playing. If you look at the education market out there, a lot of it is death by PowerPoint. We knew that in our apprenticeship, and we called the apprenticeship because none of us, we're all apprentices in a craft we'll never master. A big part of it is improv and role playing. And there's a difference between the two. Improv, is adapted theater games, and that helps with divergent thinking and getting out of what there's not enough time to kind of get into that. But the real life role playing as well. Like, for example, if I look at our Austin apprenticeship, when we were in Austin, Texas, we had a member of Highway Patrol playing a certain role. And then we had another coach playing a certain role. We give them constraints. We give them roles that they need to play. And they've got to find themselves out of that situation. So we give them personality designations. Hey, you're going to play somebody who is very close-minded. You work with Aaron over here. He's trying to get a new initiative through. You're closing it down. You very much want quantitative data in terms of changing your mind. And, we're going to add constraints too you're going to cut them off. You're never going to give them a chance to speak. And that might be something that Aaron came in with that he wants to work on. So we create overload, right? We create overload. Just like in the weight room, you put more weight on the bar, you change the angle or you change the tempo or whatever. Here we change the personality constraints, the environmental constraints, the temporal constraints. We can dial up all these little things and then we video it. So, you have to understand that we all play roles. First of all, I remember one coach and he was a friend. So he was talking some crap. He goes, "Oh, I'm not going to come to some conference where I, play make-believe." I go, "Buddy, your athletes go through walkthroughs every day. You have fighters that shadow box against invisible opponents. Special forces will go into the training ground and do, you're too good to play make-believe. Oh, and by the way, we role play every day. You're a father sometimes, you're a husband sometimes, you're a coach sometimes. We don't just walk through and play the same thing every day. As a coach, sometimes I'm a psychiatrist, sometimes I'm a babysitter, sometimes I'm the friend. And so then it's funny, like I go, all right, what else are you going to do? How do you prepare for real life if not by role playing? And that's the thing, right? Perspective is something you get isn't something you get till just after you needed it. So we have people that are like, I have like 5 problem athletes. I'm trying to figure out how to interact with them. And I'm like, all right, give me the details. What is this? What is this? We'll get 5 people from the audience. We'll give them those cues. We'll put them in a situation. We'll say, okay, you're leading the warm up. I need you to do this, you to do that. And we can really amp it up and we can really amp it down. And no matter what, if you lived enough life, it all happens. We had somebody once that came to a workshop and they're like, oh, my boss would have never acted like that. They would have never done this. 3 weeks later, they go, I worked at a new company. My boss is exactly what happened at that apprenticeship. Of course they are. Of course they are, because we meet people that are all sizes, shapes, colors, attitudes. And then it's great because we get a cheat code at Art of Coaching. We get to do this all the time. We get to do, imagine right now, like we constantly get better at it. which is why I just have the right amount of self-hate, because I've seen myself on I've seen myself so many times. And I think like, hey, if I can defend myself for just one thing, everybody should want to come hang out with me for one reason. I don't think my shit doesn't stink. I make fun of myself constantly. There are sometimes we really excel at these workshops because we jump in as well. We want to build that camaraderie. And there's other times where I'm like, oh my God, I just messed that up. And let's talk about why. And I think that like we're trying to bring some of that fun back to coaching, man. Like, why does everybody have to be so uptight? Why does everybody have to be so protective? Why can't people have fun and communicate? And we want to normalize failure. We want to like in context, right? We want to normalize. We want people that want to come and they know, okay, I'm going to look silly here, but let's go. Let's go. And like that's the point. You're going to make mistakes in real life. But I'll tell you what, we don't know of any other place doing this. And it's funny, we never have to, strength coaches tend to be the hardest sell. Military, no problem, because they're in tons of situations. Military is one of our best clients. Corporate, they do this stuff all the time at Google, at Intel, at Facebook. We've been fortunate enough to work with Facebook and Microsoft. They love it because they understand that you've got to be able to iterate. I mean, Ann, let's imagine this, and then I'll turn it back to you. Let's say you gave me a role-playing scenario, and it's a real problem you deal with in real life, and we got let's say we put 3 minutes on the clock, and we act that out. Well, we can dissect it. We have an evaluation that can give you great feedback, and then we can act that out 3 other ways. So within 12 minutes, we can get 4 different kinds of practice. Where I'm this kind of personality, I'm throwing this kind of obstacle at you. Now I'm this kind of personality, now you got to do this. Now how much more prepared are you? And how much more self-aware are you now?
And I think the beautiful thing about that too is it's real life. And I there's some fantastic books that I've read as well, but it brings the theory to life if there is, so I think acting it out, again, I think it's so important. I do. And you can, like you said, for what we do in our small businesses, we'll create those situations, whether it's client X shows up 15 minutes late. How do you handle that situation? Such and such complains about XYZ. How do you handle that situation? And then we walk through that live, like it's and cut, and it's powerful. It's very powerful.
Remember this, right? There's no script to coaching or real life. You could look at Einstein, who said we can never solve problems by using the same kind of thinking used to create them. Pierre Bourdieu said the coaching process in its entirety is a form of regulated improv. If you want to get really nerdy, it's chaos theory and dynamic systems, right? Humans are dynamic. If we look at what's chaos theory, well, it's this intricate mixture of order and disorder. If we look at like dynamic systems, right, there's patterns of behavior which are irregular, but nonetheless recognizable as these broad archetypes. And so, when you think of humans as dynamic systems and you think of life and interaction as, an element of chaos theory of which there's equifinality, you have to practice. And so role-playing really affords experiential learning, the ability to compare and contrast solution. It develops theory of mind because you're like, why did you do that? Oh, I was thinking this. Why did you do that? It helps you improve in forecasting. It's very collaborative. You get a lot of ideas, lateral thinking, and then it helps you really conceptualize what seem to be abstract problems in a more concrete way. So I always just ask people, why not role play? Because so many other professions do it. And again, this is just coaching stigma. Strength and conditioning for so long has just had a stick up its ass because they thought that you had to go to conferences, dress up in your, whatever university you're from and play West Side Story, where you snap your fingers and get ready to fight people that believe in unilateral training. And you're just like, dude, it's okay. It's okay. Like,
oh my gosh. I think the more and more I think about it too, is we confuse it a lot. I don't want to try to get all philosophical. Clouds and clocks. One's complex, one's complicated. I think it was a Karl Popper. I think it's the way too that we collect data. We confuse the two. The environment dictates the organism. Everything's changing. And I think situational awareness brings that about in a beautiful way. Want to pivot slightly, and I want to respect your time as well. Are you good for a couple more minutes, 10 minutes?
Yeah, I got a question for you. I'm putting you in the hot seat.
Let's go.
You're a big believer in this. You understand complexity. You understand the nature of this. You love peeling back layers of your skin. And I know you've been an ardent supporter of a lot of our stuff. You put skin in the game. But like I said, we still haven't got you to one. So when you ask me, why are we scared of role playing? I'm going to ask you, why the hell haven't you gotten out and had those layers of your skin put back?
No problem. And I'm giving you an excuse, but it's an excuse nonetheless. I'd say a combination of things. COVID with a small business, and then personal health. And that would be the reason. I am, and I'm planning, and you have my word, I will be at one, because I know the value that you bring. You and I have communicated via text just to help me on my podcast. And the level of detail that you send back in response is absolutely outstanding. I know exactly the content that's going to be outstanding because I know who you are. I've seen what you do. So that's the short of it. But I am going to get there. You have my word.
Yeah, well, and I say that just because of the value that you bring, right? You were a part of Conscious Coaching. People continue to talk about the part that you wrote. You handled that like such a professional. Your writing is tremendous. Your self-awareness is tremendous. Believe me, I understand the small business during COVID. What a ride that was, right?
Nuts.
I think we had to cancel more than 32 events, and collectively each event can bring in anywhere from 10 to 30K. I know you feel that on the training side. I mean, everybody listening feels that. And selfishly, I just learned so much from you when you interact. And I think the thing that I've always valued about you is you're past the stage in your life where you're so worried about what everybody else thinks about you. And, that elevates the experience for everybody, and so I had to give you a jab. We're friends, and coaches can't have conversations without yes in a little bit.
I love it, but this will educate our audience as well. What do you recommend? What's the first course that I should be in? What do you recommend? Is it the apprenticeship? Is it the speaker school? What do you recommend for someone that's never done a course before? Where should they start?
Yeah, well, I look at it as going to a doctor and saying, what medication can you give me? He's going to say, well, what symptoms do you have? So it's all about, we have different offerings that if somebody wants to learn more about the business side, they want to kind of grow and kind of building their own platform. And we've had people from professional teams, Olympic committees, outside of sport, whatever, that want to come do that. We have something called Brand Builder. And all of this can be found at artofcoaching.com. Artofcoaching.com. If you're a presenter, you want to work on, just speaking in front of crowds, things like that, we have Speaker School. If you want to work more on management, the messy realities of leadership, some of the things we've talked about, role playing, come to the apprenticeship, and so it just depends on what you want to work on. If you can't get anywhere and you're just like, oh my God, do you have anything online? Sure. Now, the most common question we get is, do you offer all those things online? No, we don't, just because you can't take the magic of in-person role playing and all that and put that online. That said, we do have a robust of offerings of online courses, everything from the entrepreneurial bent to how to manage your career, and then things that do talk about foundations of human nature, communication, all that. You can find that at artofcoaching.com/courses. And actually in July, we're going to do a massive sale. We only do it once or twice a year. I think we're only going to do it once this year, where these courses are going to be 30% off. So artofcoaching.com/courses, bought in. A lot of our resources are CEU approved, 1.8 CEUs through the NSCA. There are some that aren't CEU approved. That's not on our end. The NSCA does not believe things that talk about burnout, career management, all those things. They've said, we just don't see that in the purview of accreditation, which is sad because, they're, in my view, they're not really investing in the totality of a coach's career. But that said, I also hopefully shouldn't have to tell people you shouldn't dictate the continuing education you take just based on CEUs. My wife and I on average spend $2,000 to $3,000 a year on stuff that is not CEU related, because guess what? Not everything you're going to learn is going to be by CEUs. That's like saying every book I need to read has to be about one topic, or it has to give me this one kind of feel. Like, have dense and diverse learning experiences. That's how you grow. That's how you create an ecosystem of education. So
you have time for two more questions.
I have all the time, and I'll come to your house if you need me to.
Okay, I might sneak in a third then. Sorry. Could we talk about briefly? I know you speak about it in Valued. Can we talk about the state of our profession? Burnout. It's real. What are your thoughts? I know there's a podcast episode on that. I don't know if while we're speaking, you could possibly look that up to give that to the listener. My apologies in advance. I should have told you about that. I will link that to the show notes. But can you talk to me about burnout, and then possible ways as strength and conditioning coaches to get through that time?
Sure. Well, just being brief, if anybody listens to our podcast, it is episode 146. Again, that's episode 146 on dealing with overwhelm and burnout. I'll try to kind of be brief on this. When we look at burnout, we got to be really clear on what we're talking about. And credit to a phenomenal woman named Christina Maslach for spearheading more than a half a century of this research. I mean, it is incredibly important. She has done amazing work. And when you look at burnout was a term that was previously derided as non-scholarly pop psychology. And like I said, there's more than half a century of research on it. And it originally had its roots in healthcare because a lot of nurses and healthcare practitioners were dealing with it. But now it's been rapidly spreading into other vocations and because of the changing nature of the modern workplace, right? And a lot of it has to do with fit. It is not about mental toughness, tenacity, gratitude. They actually find, and the research by Maslach and colleagues supports this, burnout is one of the hallmark afflictions of the most dedicated amongst us, the most dedicated. It is the bedrock of emotions such as stress, anxiety, even depression. And it has very much been something that most people try to write off as the unworthy, the ungrateful, the uncommitted. And that is not the case. Now, getting into this, and I can't get into the totality of it just because, time. There are three main dimensions. Okay. There's emotional exhaustion. So that is feelings of being overextended, depleted of one's emotional and physical resources. I've certainly felt that. Now, there's been times where I tried answering every tweet, every DM. I'm putting out podcasts. I'm doing this. I'm giving everything. And then, you might get one or two people that are like, I want to pay for your courses, but I just sort of, and you start getting cynical, which is the next dimension where you're like, mother effer. I have spent so much time, effort, and money. Then there's just freeloaders and tire kickers and they don't appreciate it, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, whoa, that starts representing the interpersonal dimension of burnout, right? You start feeling more negative, callous, detached. It's depersonalized. You just, that's very hard. And then there's also, and another one I felt is inefficacy, which is like, you just feel imposter phenomenon, a little bit like, is my work even making a difference? All those kinds of pieces. And I probably had a 5-year span where I just didn't celebrate anything that I did. It was, because I felt like celebrating anything wasn't, oh, you're not being humble, you're not doing this, and blah, blah, blah. But, we had a third-party research firm reach out to more than 1,000 coaches, and 92.3% or more of them said that they had felt burnout in their career. And I'll quote you, I'm pulled up the data where one said, I believe I'm giving my all in everything I do as a coach. I've sacrificed family time, my health, and my finances for a field I love. Yet I find myself depleted and doubting I'll ever be able to even retire. Another person said, my love for the field remains, but my body's breaking down and it's becoming harder for me to see the point in continually putting my family through this. And then a final one said, I'm just obviously giving 3. I love everything about performance, but I'm no longer sure how much I'll be able to support my family given our financial situation. I feel guilty my passion is bankrupting us. So wow. I can do this for all of these. And most people think, oh, okay. And this is where I'd ask people, just kind of go to the podcast and we'll talk more about it. But what they found is there's really 6 kind of predictors. One has to deal with the workload. Another one, the sense of control you have over your career and autonomy and all that. Reward. And that doesn't need to be financial. It can be social rewards. Are you really seen as like a real coach or a great nurse or an effective this? Community. How do you feel about the community? I know, I'll be honest, man. One thing is I continued to kind of expand beyond strength and conditioning. It was really refreshing to get into other communities. Strength and conditioning, as much as I love it, it can be so toxic. It's just people that a lot of times, for as many wonderful people as there is, there's also people that they just always think it's somebody else's job to do it all for them or save them or, why don't we have a union? But none of these people want to do anything. A sense of fairness in your career. Do you feel like if you did the job, you get the just rewards and desserts and values? And so without going too much into this, what doesn't work is just going on vacation. And her research says, well, is it the person? Is it the position or is it the situation? It's none of those in singularity. It's about the fit. If you just take a vacation, but you come back and the workload and all this is kind of off and, and all this, and we give people Valued, and I'm not trying to plug it, I'm just being honest. Our course Valued gives people handouts and a way for you to assess if you're burnout and what it is and then what you can do. We give a lot of resources, and I don't create anything that I haven't gone through myself. So, but it helps people identify mismatches in their life and their career so they can get to the nitty gritty, just like we do a movement screening. Oh, you got pain in your hip? Why is it? And it helps them identify that, and then we give solutions.
It is interesting reading some of the comments that the individuals that went through the course offered. It's interesting. I look at our field now, strength and conditioning, and I think about this, like, just look at the numbers. 35,000 undergraduates a year graduate in kinesiology. That's undergrads.
Yeah.
We have a supply and demand problem. That's not including PhDs, masters. Let's just hypothetically say half of those people want to be a strength and conditioning coach in the NHL. That's a 0.00007% chance. We have a supply and demand issue. One of the things that I spoke to you when I was interviewed by you on our podcast, and you talked about this idea. I think it was Dr. Dre. I don't know. What's your next step, Anthony? Or how are you going to grow? And I remember being tongue-tied with that question. Like, what? And the reality is not many people are going to be retiring as a strength coach. What are your side hustles? How can you, I don't like using the word side hustles. How can you leverage your education? How can you, create a small business? Maybe it is, or has nothing to do with strength and conditioning, but it's bringing in some sort of revenue generation. It hit me when you talked to me about it. I was like, well, I don't have a really good answer for that, Brett. But it's scary to think about.
Doesn't feel like we talked about earlier. The field doesn't do anything where they have educational outputs of career development. And the sad thing is then when I create a course like Valued, and you have governing bodies that say, hey, we're not going to give CEUs. And then you have coaches that were like, oh, I don't want to buy it because it doesn't have CEUs. You're like, dude, then you're your own problem, right? Yeah. Those people, that's their own fault. If everything has to be gift wrapped for you and all this, that you're your own problem. You have to be able to step out and invest in these things and look at it. But yeah, you have to have a plan. Like, that's one thing that made me feel good about Art of Coaching. And I love strength and conditioning with all my heart. And we've had plenty of opportunities to go back to team settings and whatever. But at the end of the day, I have to think about, what do I want to do when I'm 60? I still want to help people solve a wide variety of problems. And I found that the things that ignited me the most at this point in my life is helping people navigate issues in their relationship, in their work. I like dealing with complex, varied problems. I want people to go to bed and say, that company helped me solve some of my most meaningful problems. And I like the variety of it. I like people. I like it's interesting. So I'm like, well, why not do that now, man? Why not do that now? And so I just think that, like, we have to remember coach has nothing to do with performance. Somebody asked me, well, when did you decide to get out of coaching? I go, get out of coaching. I coach every day.
Absolutely.
Coach like, why do you think just teaching people exercises is the only manifestation of coaching? I mean, that's crazy, and yeah, people just have to periodize their career. Bottom line, I think the sad thing is, Anthony, and the thing that I haven't really figured out is generally, you're going to release this podcast and there's going to be some people that are just in the stage of their career that only want to talk about sets and reps. They need this information the most. But by default, once they see my name as your guest and know that that's not what we're going to talk about, they'll never listen to it. So the thing that you have to solve for is, how do you get the people that need this the most to listen to it? And it'll happen in your podcast too. You'll continue to be known for something or whatever. And people might just think, oh, that's just a hockey podcast. It's not just a hockey podcast. Nothing exists in a vacuum in coaching. And so they'll never listen to it. And that's the problem, is you got to realize that, man, you just got to continue to put things out there in a variety of ways. We've had some people that said, hey, man, I didn't listen to your stuff for 7 years. And it wasn't until COVID happened that I realized just how stuck I was. And then they came. And I'm like, well, what was it? And they're like, really, man, I think it just took COVID happening for me to wake up. So hopefully that offers some reprieve to some people. There are some things that are just not in your control. And the people you're trying to impact, it's an old Bruce Lee adage, the student appears the teacher appears when the student is ready.
Sure.
You just got to be consistent. You got to plug away. It's dollar cost averaging. It's compound interest. It's consistency. But we got to find ways to get people to realize, and that's stigma that I've had to overcome, is how do you release this? And people, for a while, people just thought every time I'm on a podcast, I'm talking about conscious coaching. That was half a decade ago. we've done a crazy amount of content since then. And so, I appreciate that you wanted to go into these topics in the podcast, because a lot of times you get on these and people are like, talk to me about conscious coaching. Like, dude, I'll love to. And I'm so thankful that book did well and has continued to do well. But there are so many other topics we cover now, and you do too. Like, it's not like I don't think anytime I call you, it's just to talk about hockey. Yep. Like there might be things just about being in a relationship, being in a business. Sometimes I just want to talk to you about, sometimes I just like your jokes. People have to understand there's a second mountain, right? So if you don't want to call it a side hustle, think about what's your second mountain. Cool. Do what you want to do in strength and conditioning, try to get there, whatever, but realize you ain't going to be happy right there, that you're grateful, but never satisfied. What's the second mountain? The second mountain for me is helping people deal with people problems that are complex, require a lot of lateral thinking and things that keep me fresh and don't put me into one bucket.
That's absolutely beautiful. Last two questions, if I have it, if you can give me footnote version. Number one, we talked about it at the start of the podcast, new book. Is there a title for it yet? Is there a release date for it yet? Or is that under wraps? Secret?
So I'll give you some information. I'm going to do some shameless self-promotion here. I cannot give the title away yet. We're in talks with publishers. Those things change. There's working titles, there's things like that. What I can tell people is if they want all the details about it, and I'll still give you some details here, you can go to artofcoaching.com/begin. Begin as in start, begin your journey, artofcoaching.com/begin. That is where all the details will come out. There are some things legally and contractually I can't talk about right now around it. That's just publisher stuff. That's not me trying to sound cool. I can tell you this. The book is not strength and conditioning based. The book is leadership based. The book is not leadership based in terms of positivity and chop wood and carry water. And this is a book for the kind of people who have read all those books and realize that real leadership is not solved by parables and positivity. This is a book for people that have realized that, just morning routines and all this shit is not going to help you deal with manipulative people. This is a book for the underdogs and the anti-heroes that feel like everything they've read has not taught them about the messy realities of how to overcome power dynamics, the agendas of the unscrupulous, and all those things. And they want something that says, man, I do not feel like I meet the classical definition of a servant-based leader and this and that, but I know some shit. And I know that it requires taking the gloves off sometimes and learning how to play dirty, still in ethical bounds, to get what you need to get done. This is a book for those people. So it's nothing against the people that want positivity, servant-based leadership, all these things, nothing against that. But this is a book for people that kind of know that leadership in the real world is not clean. You will not get out of it without getting your hands dirty. And you know that leadership is a lonely, full contact sport. So if that resonates with you, you'll like the book. If it does not resonate with you, my work is likely not for you, and that's okay. Still would love to meet you. Come say hi. I just don't want to waste your time. My stuff is not be a servant, hope for the best, all these things, and it'll all work out. I don't believe in that because that's not the way the world works.
That's outstanding. Last question. I've listened to your podcast and I've read your book, Conscious Coaching. We've talked about the story about your early life, and I know you have this attitude, that maybe not the attitude, but this mindset that any day, like I live one day at a time. This is if something leaves me tomorrow, I want to leave my legacy. I want to does that make sense the way I'm explaining that? My question, this memento mori, the Stoics would say. So here's my last question for you. What do you want your legacy to be? I can tell you, I'm gonna pump your tires a bit, because I can tell you, you have right now, if it was tomorrow, you have left the profession, in my opinion, in a much better place. Opening eyes to not just sets and reps, leaving things better, creating good, solid relationships, calling at times some people when they need some honesty in a helpful, constructive way. You've left this business and this profession in a better place. My question to you, though, is how do you want your legacy penned? You're a father now, but correct me if I'm wrong, Bronson, right? That's a
Bronson. Yeah,
that's
research.
a freaking action figure. Your name, dude. That guy could be is Hollywood star, baby. So my question to you is legacy. Where do you see that?
Yeah, I know what I don't want it to be, and I fear that it's going to be. I think that I'm scared that I'm gonna be. I know I don't like the term victim, but I'll just use it in this context. An example of dead rapper syndrome. And I don't mean this to be rude, but there are some times where a musician passes and whatever. And of course, all those things are tragic, right? But all of a sudden somebody will pass and they were the best thing ever. Oh my God, they were the best. And when they were alive, nobody listened to them. Nobody did this, whatever. And then we see this all the time. People don't appreciate, and I don't want to be that. And I have wondered sometimes because, in my career, I turned down some opportunities to go to pro sport for various reasons, not for a lack of wanting to. Some of these things were just timing related and all that. And I do know there are certain strength coaches that would have listened to my message earlier or more had I taken that job, because people tend to listen to messages that from those that, are in positions that they aspire to be in. And our field is so obsessed with professional sport and this and that and whatever. That I know that somebody's just praying for the day that somebody that's won like 5 championships in the NFL, NHL, NBA comes out and says all the things that I've said, so they can listen to them instead of me, right? I know that they're just waiting for that day. They're waiting for it. Or if I pass, then the NSCA would be like, oh, the Brett Bartholomew Award for nobody wants to appreciate shit when you're around, which I think is really weird, but you just come to terms with it. I think as simple as it is, man, I want my legacy to be somebody that just cared more about bigger picture things and was the perfect antagonist in a helpful way, in a way that made people face the uncomfortable situations and circumstances that they needed to do to become a different version of themselves. And we had a guy on our podcast named Michael Tucker that did a movie essay on The Dark Knight. And The Dark Knight is all about, Christopher Nolan wrote it in the essence of game theory, the prisoner's dilemma. But Heath Ledger's Joker is what he was, the unstoppable force needed to make Batman realize he needed to break the rules a little bit, become something different than he was, this rigid, singularly focused, one rule living individual, to become the Dark Knight. And character is developed by the choices we make under pressure. So I understand that people are not always going to like the way I say things. They're not going to like the uncomfortable truths, but I hope they understand that I'm just trying to put them in positions to help them evolve before the things that happened to me when it was too late, when it was this, when I was hospitalized, happened. So I just hope people realize that everything I do, the conviction I bring is meant to be helpful. I'm meant to be the Joker in that situation, because you grow up thinking Batman's the hero, but when you get older, you realize that, the Joker was right about some things. Like, life doesn't have all these rules. There's many ways to do it. I'm not talking about the maniacal psychopath killer. I don't have time to sit here and be literal for everybody that can't read between the lines. So somebody that cared more and forced them to change and become a different version of themselves that was more socially agile and adept. In essence, somebody that helped them wake the hell up so they could be who they were meant to be.
Our guest today has been Coach Brett Bartholomew. Brett, thanks so much for joining us.
Appreciate you, brother.